village in rural Africa trying to figure out a new water pollution treatment system. Who can help us? And for incentive is a similar system, but it's a profit-making one. So a company needs an innovation. Who out there can help us solve this problem? So the global networked intelligence can dive in and in a heartbeat sort of get the right idea to the right problem at the right time. Philanthropy, globalgiving.org, Kickstarter. Anybody supported something on Kickstarter? I have. Where you can, if you want to make a film about sanitation problems in India, you just put out a trailer, put out a little proposal online. You could say in the next 30 days, if I don't raise the money, it won't happen, but if I do, you'll be part of this project to help make a film about X, Y, or Z. It's an amazing way to match up excess capacity, meaning capital, with meaningful projects. So again, to demonstrate what I mean about the power of sharing and shaping ideas, where you're putting together skill sets that can't do something on their own, I got to go back to my earthquake reporting. I started reporting intensively on earthquakes myself, mostly after the Sichuan disaster in China, about in 2008. And this is one of the schools that fell down. Completely avoidable that this school fell down. It was just really bad construction. And those are the kids who died in that school because the ties, the iron parts weren't tied together correctly. And we did a big piece in the Times about that. So I've been thinking a lot about design. You know, we're in the world's biggest, the history of the human species. We're having our greatest build out in history right now. The next couple of decades, we're building more structures by some calculations that have ever been built in history of all the structures built by people. So if you can get ahead of that, especially with schools, hospitals, things that matter, and make sure the designs are robust in earthquake zones, you're going to avoid some of the shocks that can really blunt progress in poor places. So there's a really great and innovative engineer, earthquake engineer at Purdue, named Santiago Pujol, and after the disaster in Sichuan, I did a story for the science section of the paper on his novel design for building schools using the same materials that schools are being built with everywhere in the world, bricks and concrete and rebar and glass, and just reconfiguring it slightly to get a much more robust building. Same materials, so no difference in cost, just information makes the building safer. So I went to my son, my older son, who at the time was a sophomore at Pace University. He wants to be in special effects in the movies, so he likes to use computers to make the animation, you know, blow up buildings and stuff. But I said, hey Daniel, can you, here's what this thing is about. Can you make an animation to show how you can make this building safer? And so he gave it a try. And this is what it's like. So this is the problem. You get these pancaking of buildings often where the vertical components fail like this and the floors collapse. And here the issue is when you have a half wall, those bricks butt up against the, Now, that's not perfect. He needs to do, you know, a 2.0. But watch here. So here's like, this is the better design. So let's run that experiment over again. You just do that. And now look at the shake table at Purdue. Here's a real test of that design. When the bricks fill up the space, they help support the columns instead of breaking them. And here's what that could look like as an actual building, and kind of a fairly attractive classroom. So, you know, I would love to get this video in front of every community in the world where they're building school buildings at a frantic pace to keep up with those billion, remember the 2 billion teenagers and younger kids? So I still have work to do. I put it on .earth. It's been seen by several thousand people. I want it to be seen by many more, but it shows you the potential to put different skill sets together and come out with a better outcome. And that also means that students can get involved in this. You know, what can you do to work with engineers on this campus to demonstrate or illustrate what they're doing in ways that can be communicated more fully to the world outside? Here's another example, quickly, so we don't run out of time. So on this Match.com, busy science teacher seeks. And one thing I learned at a meeting of the AAAS a couple of years ago, the American Academy for Science, Advancement of Science, is school teachers crave having little like 1-minute videos to start a discussion in a classroom about something like momentum or electricity or resistance. They don't need Frozen Planet 5-hour documentaries. They need 1-minute little explainers just to get things going. So, and I found an example on the web that was done by college students in California a couple of years ago on geoengineering.
Today on Waves of the Future. future. A closer look at geoengineering. What is geoengineering? Well, geoengineering is something global, intentional, and unnatural. And we've got some smart fellers figuring out new methods. Let's look at a few. Space mirrors. In this lifelike reenactment, Eric is the sun and Patrick is the Earth. As Patrick orbits Eric, he receives some of Eric's solar radiation, making Patrick very warm. Let's see what Patrick has up his sleeve. By deploying space mirrors, Patrick deflects some of Eric's warming radiation, making himself comfortably cool.
So you get the idea. And again, now that could be worked on. There's aspects of that that are problematic. Later in the piece, they misspelled the word algae, for example. so you have a setup at a school where, you know, busy science teacher seeks, student provides, climate scientist said, well, not exactly, and then you come up with a more robust iteration, and then that gets distributed to school systems in a heartbeat, just online. You know, it's a resource for both. And so I think that's another example of how this can work. And then there's the do-it-yourself aspect of all this stuff. Fracking is a big issue near where I live, in the Hudson Valley, and it has been in Pennsylvania. There was a guy in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago who, to fill the information gap, remember, in a time of shrinking budgets, it's hard for regulatory apparatuses to keep up with issues like this. So he said all the drilling data is online, the permits, the violations, so he created a website called fracktrack.org for Pennsylvania drilling data. And you click on the button and you see this, you don't have to see, basically this is all the information. Was there a violation? Is this a well that's already producing? Et cetera, et cetera. What's the address? What's the GPS coordinates? And so you can get some clarity and you can help identify bad actors and you can help sort of build community awareness of problems in ways that, with just setting up a website. It took him 2 days to do this. I'm going to skip this slide just because I know we're running short on time. And then there's stuff that doesn't really relate to technology. I can tell you the volume of the world's atmosphere. You know, it's a certain number of cubic kilometers. Or I can show it to you, as Adam Neiman did in this illustration. That's the atmosphere. If you put all the air in the atmosphere at sea level pressure, that's the volume. It's not propaganda, it's a fact, it's a number. But it's a way of conveying the number that's different than just the traditional way. And here's all the world's liquid water, the green bubble, which looks like it's actually right over Champaign, right over Urbana. And then that's just a starting point. So that's all the world's oceans and lakes and rivers. And again, it's non-controversial, that is it. And then you say to your students, well, what's the volume of all the world's fresh water? Or what's the volume of the world's potable water? Which I believe is about 0.007% of that number. And then once they do that calculation, they realize you couldn't even show it on that map. That's a learnable moment. In other words, you're not teaching, you're fostering learning and insights by having students engage in novel ways of thinking about things. And sometimes conveying an idea more effectively is just simply a matter of choosing the right wavelength. This is, there's nothing about this picture that says there's a problem, except maybe that oil tank needs a paint job. There's a little rust stain, right? But if you look at it in infrared, this was outside of Denver a couple of years ago. The EPA commissioned someone to go around with an infrared video camera and look for methane leakage from our gas and oil facilities. And I wrote a big page one story for the Times, but I think the video I posted on the web says it much better. So here's what that same scene looks like in the infrared wavelength. Now, can you imagine if you're driving down the highway there every day, seeing that? Do you think that we would find that acceptable? Knowing that that's a potent greenhouse gas, knowing that it's a wasted resource. Remember, natural gas is a valuable fuel. I don't think so. So there, again, we have to think of what's the best tool for the job. And again, it's not always about communication technology. It's about a state of mind, a state of intentionality. And it also is about getting out of what Randy Olson, a friend of mine, calls the nerd loop. Too much climate cogitation is just cogitation. We're just talking to ourselves about how to communicate about climate instead of actually experimenting and finding new ways to talk to the public and ourselves about these issues. And these are just two experiments. Richard Alley from Penn State at the right is a very adventurous scientist who's also an adventurous and courageous, gutsy, even reckless communicator. He sings about climate change and geology, and he dances. He has this. He illustrates the Milankovitch cycle of the ice ages by doing kind of He says, this is the equator, this is the pole. My bald spot is the North Pole. And it's great, and it's engaging, and it gets people's attention. Of course, he has tenure, so he can get away with all that stuff. There are young people who are finding ways to communicate effectively. Young scientists with blogs. There's a number of them that I follow regularly who tweet and that stuff. Now, just to close here, before we move to questions, I want to acknowledge that in the end, this is not all about digital experience, that the real world matters hugely. My wife is a former science teacher. She would get her kids outside the school every spring, and they do a stream study. The kids get wet, they're turning over rocks and stuff and getting dirty, and that's a vital part of the path forward as well. And it can happen in cities as easily as in rural areas or wilderness. And so a couple of years ago, my younger son, who was 9 or 10 at the time, we went for a little row in a pretty crowded, developed part of Florida where my parents lived. And we had seen some herons clearly nesting there, so we went back the next day with a video camera, and my son was going to make a little documentary. So this is like just a couple of seconds of that.
This is close up in the mangroves. See if we can spot any animals. Whoa, there it goes. Well, that was amazing. Looked like a statue.
First spot.
Yep.
Let's see what else is coming.
Spot where we saw tri-colored heron babies. Let's see if we can spot them again.
Oh, here.
Those are the babies.